Hi, and welcome to today's weekly video. Today is October 23rd, 2024. What it's like to care for some of the most endangered animals on Earth. David Sisko is working to save some of the rarest endangered species on the planet, Kahuli, Hawaii's native tree snails. The snails play a crucial role in the ecosystem, having evolved over millions of years on the isolated islands. When Hurricane Douglas came barreled toward Oahu in 2020, David Sisko quickly packed up and drove to higher ground. But he wasn't evacuating his family, he was evacuating his snails. Sisko works with some of the rarest endangered species on the planet. Kahuli, Hawaii's native tree snails. The colorful, jewel-like snails were once so abundant. It's like they were like Christmas ornaments covering the trees. Almost all of the 750 different species were found only in Hawaii. Today, more than half of those species are gone. The extinctions happening in the span of a human lifetime. Sisko and his team with Hawaii's Department of Land and Natural Resources have the heavy task of saving what's left. Inside this lab, Sisko and the team care for 40 species of snails. For some snails, it's the only place they live, having been brought into captivity to stave off extinction. To stave off extinction, 40 species of snails, each about the size of a dime, live in human care inside an unremarkable trailer near Honolulu. For some, it's the only place they found, their wild populations having completely disappeared. Most people, when they think endangered species going to exist, they think of pandas and tigers and elephants. But imagine having 40 different panda species that are all as rare as pandas are, Sisko says. That's what this facility is. This winter, one species of snail will inch toward an auspicious milestone. It will be released in a special enclosure in the mountains of Oahu, one that has been painstakingly prepared to give the snails the best chance of survival in their natural environment. Still, the outlook of Hawaii's snails is uncertain, symbolizing a new era in the conservation of endangered species. Around the world, plants and animals are being brought into captivity as a last-ditch effort against extinction. But as the climate heats up and invasive species continue to spread, many have no clear path to return to nature in the near term. That could mean they stay in human care, isolated in zoos for the imperiled. In the face of the biodiversity crisis, many wildlife biologists say there's no other choice. These are biological treasures that are irreplaceable. Sisko says, "It is now or never. What we manage to keep on Earth will be what the next generation is able to put back." Inside a snail emergency room, around 1 million species of plants and animals are at risk of extinction around the planet, according to the United Nations report. With habitat loss and temperatures rising with climate change, the biodiversity crisis is only accelerating, and the effects can be cumulative. Losing of species and an ecosystem can crumble like a house of cards. Riley started working with the Snail Extinction Prevention Program as a student and fell in love with the snails. Their cultural significance, ecological significance, they are just pretty to look at. Once you meet them, it's hard not to fall in love with them, Nickerson explains. "I don't think people realize how fast things are changing," Sisko says. "It's happening, like, right now, as I'm talking to you. There's species blinking out in the wild right now. To keep that from happening to Hawaii's native snails, Shishko never turns off his phone. They rely on life support systems in the Snail Extinction Prevention Program, kept in environmental chambers that control temperature and release mist to stimulate their native rainforest habitat. Sensors are set up to detect any problems, alerting Shishko and his team 24 hours a day. The rows of plastic tanks, same as the pet store variety, hold some of the rarest animals there. Shishko and his team were only able to find 6 remaining Achatinella fulgens in the wild. Now, in captivity, their population is slowly growing. Shishko pulls out one with snails the size of a fingernail hiding among the leaves. It's Achintella fulgens, a snail with a pale yellow shell and a bold black stripe swirling around it. Most are withdrawn into their shells because they're nocturnal, but a small, gingerly one pokes out its antenna. They're really beautiful, Shishko says. I've never had anyone come in here before and not leave thinking the snails were really cool and cute. In Hawaii tradition, snails sing, Shishko says. They represent voice. So they are probably one of the most revered invertebrates in the world. Other snails have intricate stripe patterns, almost like they're sporting a plaid shirt. One snail has a shell like a miniature cinnamon roll. Some are almost iridescent, glowing with gold and greens. Our tree snails are known for the jewels of the forest, he says. The islands are dripping in snails. They were everywhere. Hawaii's tree snails play a crucial role in the ecosystem, having evolved over millions of years on the isolated islands. They don't usually eat leaves, instead eating the fungus that grows on them. That helps keep the native trees clean and recycles nutrients in the forest. The snails also hold an important piece of native Hawaiian culture. Their shells are used to make lei. In Hawaiian tradition, snails sing. Hungry like a wolf, Hawaii's tree snails were no match for the barrage of changes that humans brought. Rats eat snails, and they arrived on ships, both Polynesian and European. The snail's habitat disappeared as Hawaii's forests were cleared for agriculture, but the biggest threat came in the form of another snail. In the 1950s, a predatory snail was introduced to Hawaii from Florida. The rosy wolf snail was released to control another invasive snail, but as so many invasive species stories go, it quickly spread. Rosy wolf snails are exceptionally good at eating native snails, hunting them down by following their slime trails and ripping them from their shells. When they encounter a slime trail, they know the direction it was going, Shishko says. Once they're locked in on a trail from a native snail, they go right up to it. There's no getting away. As hundreds of native snail species began disappearing, Shishko and other biologists realized the only way to save them was to bring them into captivity. The population of Anchytella fulgens, the snail with the bold stripe, was known to persist in a group of trees that somehow hadn't been invaded by a rosy wolf snails. But a heavy storm hit, causing the trees to fall in a landslide. Shishko's team found only 6 of the snails on the ground and collected them, just barely escaping extinction. Other attempts weren't so lucky. One species, thought to be extinct, was rediscovered in a tree, but it was too late by the time Shishko's team hurried back to collect them. It was gut-wrenching to know we had that chance, and they were gone, he says, and that species is extinct now. And then there's George, the only remaining individual of the Anticella ebexuolfa. It lived in Shishko's lab, but with no remaining potential mates, died as the last of its species. The trailers of the Snail Extinction Prevention Program used to be at a lower elevation, but are now at a site less vulnerable to flooding from hurricanes. The eventual goal is to return the snails to their natural habitat, like the mountains of Oahu. Sleepless nights. Even for the snails secured in captivity, recovery is slow. Hawaii's native snails are 5 years old when they start reproducing and give live birth to a single baby. Over a year, they only produce between 1 and 5 offspring in all. Growing the population from a small number of individuals can be a decades-long process. Inside the lab, there are also risks lurking. The snails need fresh native plants for food, so the team is continually in the process of cleaning the tanks, removing old leaves without missing a snail, and replacing them with new leaves. But the plants can carry pathogens that kill the snails, potentially wiping out an entire species. It is super stressful, says Xisco. All of us feel it. People might think it's silly to feel that for snails, but if we mess up, it's over for a species. So yeah, I have sleepless nights. Xisco didn't dream of being a nail expert, but as a kid was introduced to them as part of a science internship as an undergraduate. The snails picked me, he says with a laugh. Now, with so many of them in peril, Xisco says, the only choice is to keep going, despite the long hours. I feel it's unacceptable to let a species go, he says. I feel like we have to try at the very least. We're not going to be able to save everything, we have to try. A predator-free patch of forest. This winter, after decades in captivity, one snail will make a monumentous journey back to its forest home in the mountains of Oahu. Xisco's team has been carefully preparing a small patch of forest for the Antichyla fubucus to return to. Survival in the wild means keeping out predators, so Xisco's team has introduced a wall, Jurassic Park style. The large fence is covered in rosy wolf snail darrants, such a rough metal patch they don't want to crawl on, a sharp metal lip they get stuck under, and a wire at the top to give them a small shock. Around the quarter-acre enclosure, rosy wolf snails are not hard to spot. Xisco's team lets down a ladder to get inside and then immediately pulls it up again. We don't have to take any chances, he says. So we go in and then pull up the drawbridge. It's almost like they're trying to storm the castle. Removing the rosy wolf snails from inside the enclosure is even harder task, because for the last year and a half, a field team has periodically searched the ground and trees for them, examining each blade of grass. Rosy wolf snail eggs are as small as a tic-tac. We line up in a line and then comb through the leaf litter, says field technician Sydney Stifield with a half smile. You're on your hands and knees in the rain and the hot sun, feeling and looking. Returning the native snails to the wild will be a big moment. But it's not about setting them free in nature. At the most, it's about creating redundancy, another population that helps ensure their survival if something goes wrong. A lot of people, when you're talking about endangered species, you're talking about recovery, Xisco says. But we're not. We're talking about stabilization. Keeping them on Earth is what we're trying to do. There are 13 of these small enclosures across several Hawaiian islands now, with 10 more being planned. Xisco says the challenge is scaling up. Given how labor-intensive they are, finding the resources to save snails can be a tough sell, especially compared to some of the better-known endangered species. The future of Hawaii's treasured snails is not guaranteed. Real recovery will mean finding a way to control rosy wolf snails in the landscape. a solution that is still elusive. In the meantime, Cisco's team will keep going. It's like caring for a critically ill patient family member, he says. I feel like I have to do this. What we do now will matter to the trajectory of the Earth. To save nature, world leaders aim to turn words into action at Biodiversity Summit. More than 1 million species are at risk of extinction in the coming decades because of human actions. This week, world leaders are meeting in Colombia to discuss how to preserve biodiversity and prevent habitat loss. 2 years ago, nearly every country on Earth signed on to a landmark agreement to protect the fast-eroding natural world. It was celebrated as the Paris Moment for the world's threatened and endangered plants, animals, and ecosystems. At a global pledge aimed at slowing biodiversity loss in the same way the Paris Climate Agreement aimed, and so far has failed, to drastically cut climate warming pollution. Now, world leaders are gathering at the 16th United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity in Colombia to see how close they are to reaching these targets. By all accounts, they still have a long way to go. Take, for example, one of the most ambitious goals agreed to at the last Biodiversity Summit, a pledge to protect 30% of the planet's land and water by 2030, a concept known as 30 by 30. A recent report published last week by a collection of conservative groups and philanthropies found that only 8.3% of the world's oceans are designated as marine protected areas, and much of that area is protected only in name, meaning they are so loosely regulated that harmful activities like fishing and mining persist. At current rates, the report found less than 10% of the world's oceans will be protected by 2030. The gap between pledge and action is vast and without urgent, meaningful protection. The 30 by 30 goal will remain unrealized, said Beth Pike, director of the Marine Protection Atlas at the Marine Conservation Institute. The time to turn commitments into real, meaningful change is now, because our ocean can't wait. The gap between pledges and action is expected to loom large at COP16. Here's what to expect. But first, why should you care? More than 1 million species are at risk of extinction, many within decades because of human actions. Forests are being cut down for agriculture and development, while climate change-fueled wildfires are scorching others. In 2023, nearly 10 soccer fields worth of tropical forests were lost every minute. The loss of nature isn't just a problem for plants and animals. More than half of the world's GDP is dependent on nature, according to the World Economic Forum. Insects and birds pollinate the crops that more than 8 billion people on Earth eat. Wetlands store and clean water. Plants and fungi maintain healthy soils and provide medicine. Forests and peatlands sequester climate warming carbon. Scientists warn that the Amazon rainforest, which houses roughly 10% of the world's biodiversity and helps stabilize the planet's climate, could soon reach a tipping point when large swaths of it transition from forest to savanna. We are talking about biosphere tipping points, said Rebecca Shaw, chief scientist at the World Wildlife Fund. We're talking about the combination of the destruction of nature with climate change that creates outsized impacts and runaway outcomes that we cannot change and that will have catastrophic outcomes for the planet. What are the goals of COP16? The last convention on biological diversity, COP15, was the goal setter. Every 10 years, member nations and indigenous groups negotiate a framework that sets targets for each to achieve over the overcoming decade. At COP15 in Montreal, nations agreed to 23 targets for 2030 and 4 goals for 2050. They included everything from managing human-wildlife conflict to reducing subsidies for industries that are harming the natural world. During this year's 2-week convention in Colombia, delegates will dig into the details and figure out how to implement those goals. Member nations are supposed to submit national plans showing how they will protect 30% of their land and water by 2030. More than 85% of the countries missed the UN's deadline to submit those pledges ahead of the COP16. Astrid Shoemaker, Executive Secretary of the Convention on Biological Diversity, said she's optimistic that by the end of the year there will be more progress. We understand that the fact that this is a bit slow is not because there's no action being taken, but it is because countries are taking this process more seriously, she said. It's not just the environment ministries that map the plans. They're really involving other ministries, the whole of government approach, and that means they take more time. Other goals at COP16 include providing more financial support for biodiversity, recognizing the roles of indigenous peoples and local communities in helping to preserve nature, and integrating efforts to protect nature with other international initiatives to combat climate change and desertification. Some good trends and some bad. A pair of recent reports show that despite global pledges, biodiversity loss is accelerating in many places. Nearly every country in the world and hundreds of businesses, non-governmental groups, and indigenous peoples organizations have signed onto various pledges intended to halt and reverse deforestation by 2030. And in some places, like the Brazilian Amazon, there has been progress. But a report published earlier this month by a coalition of research organizations and NGOs found that deforestation is on the rise globally, driven by increases in other parts of South America, Indonesia, Africa, and North America. A clear problem is that progress on forest protection is vulnerable to shifting political and economic priorities, said Erin Matson, a senior consultant at Climate Focus and co-author to the report in a statement. When the right conditions are in place, such as a strong enforcement and clear regulations, countries see major progress. The next year, if economic or political conditions change, forest loss can come back roaring. The other report, published earlier this month by the World Wildlife Fund, found that global wildlife populations have shrunk by an average of 73% over the last 50 years. The number is eye-popping, but it does not mean that all wildlife has declined that much. The Living Planet Index, the tool used to report averages how much different monitored populations of species have declined over time, and some scientists say it's skewed by smaller populations of animals that have seen steep drop-offs. Shaw, who helped compile the report, said the takeaway message is the same. When you look at vertebrate populations, mammals, fish, reptiles, birds, and amphibians, when you see those declines, it's an early warning indicator of the unraveling of the functioning of nature. All the more reason, she said, for the world to take urgent actions.
3 weeks to go until Election Day. The presidential race is still in a dead heat, with both campaigns looking to cut into their opponents' margins. For more on their strategies and policies, I'm joined now by our Politics Monday duo. That is Amy Walter of the Cook Political Report with Amy Walter and Tamara Keith of NPR. Great to see you both.
Good to be here.
All right, let's take a quick look now, set the stage. 2 new national polls to kind of tell us about the race. The first is from NBC News right now. You see Harris with 48 and Trump with 48% there. The second is from ABC News, and you've got Harris with 49% there, Trump with 47%. That is within the margin of error. So, Amy, it's a close race, getting closer, it seems.
Yeah, it does feel that way. You know, if you think about where we were, say, in September, maybe at the end of September, it had been a pretty momentous few weeks for Kamala Harris. She gets the nomination. The base rallies around her pretty quickly. We go right to the DNC. Then she has a successful debate. But that momentum has since I don't know whether the word is plateaued or hit a wall. And there is some signs in those national polls that there's been a little backsliding as well, that Trump is doing much better with independent voters. He's basically halved in that poll, as well as CBS. All three networks came out with their national surveys. So there's that sense that, on the issues there's also the fact that on the issues that voters are the most concerned about, like the economy, Trump still has the lead. To me, the most important thing I found in that NBC poll is that voters look at Trump's presidency retroactively a lot rosier than they did a year ago, and probably a lot rosier than they did when he was sitting as president. Harris's entire focus is on trying to make the case that he shouldn't be brought back into the White House. But right now, you saw most voters, or a plurality of voters in that NBC poll, saying they thought Trump's policies helped them. They did not think that Biden's policies had helped them.
And Tam, we've been seeing the Harris campaign rolling out some major surrogates, right? President Obama last week, President Clinton this week, specifically trying to reach male voters, specifically Black men. We saw some new economic proposals from the Harris campaign today. How crucial is that demo for Harris to win?
That demographic is very important. In a race that is going to be decided on the margins, we always say this, but in a race that's going to be decided on the margins, she can't afford to lose these voters. And I was in North Carolina last week reporting in a part of the state where Black voter turnout really was down in 2022 and has been falling in recent years. Talking to voters, I went to barbershops. I talked to some voters who I had talked to when Joe Biden was on the ballot, went back and talked to them again now that Kamala Harris is there. The euphoria that you're seeing at her rallies was not present in those barbershops. And a couple of people I talked to said specifically that, while they were supporting Harris, they weren't sure that all of their male friends and family would, simply because they don't believe that their friends and family are ready for a woman leader, for a female president. They're talking to their friends about it and going back and forth about it. But this is actually a real concern that was voiced by former President Obama at a campaign event in Pittsburgh, where he said, the enthusiasm, particularly among Black men, isn't what it was for him. And he called it out and said that maybe there just are some people who aren't feeling it. Now, does that persuade? Does that move people to the polls?
Yeah.
I don't know. But they are certainly being quite open about their challenges. And she'll be appearing with Charlemagne the God, doing a town hall style event, again, trying to reach that key demographic.
So much more to unpack in that we won't have time to in this one conversation.
Yes.
But Amy, the Harris campaign also announced she's going to do an interview on Fox.
Yep.
Sit down with Bret Baier in Pennsylvania on Wednesday. Is it risky for the Democratic nominee to go on the pro-Trump network with 3 weeks left in the election?
Right. So when we talk about fighting on the margins, the other margin is where she does with white voters, especially white voters with a college degree. So for as much as her coalition is not looking like the Biden coalition with voters of color, where she is doing better is than Biden did, and probably, if this holds, than any other Democrat has ever done, is with white college educated voters. Now that, again, you're not going to win over a lot of Fox voters, but pulling in at some of the margins. I think what she's also trying to do is to get and sort of goad at Donald Trump, to go out in the public a lot more. She needs Donald Trump to be in the spotlight. More specifically, some of the things that he says and does that what Laura Barron Lopez's piece just was about, we have to be careful because of the enemy within. Making that a centerpiece of her campaign. And one way to do that is to go on to sources of news that aren't necessarily friendly to her side.
Well, Tam, to that point, in terms of what we heard from former President Trump, there has been a ramping up, an escalation of some of the more dangerous kind of rhetoric, now saying if he was reelected, he would go after the enemy within with the U.S. military. That was yesterday. He said that the same day that his running mate, J.D. Vance, once again refused to say in an interview that Trump lost the 2020 election. I mean, these are anti-democratic messages, but not disqualifying for his supporters.
These are absolutely anti-democratic messages. However, he is not trying to win over new voters. He's not trying to expand, into suburban women who didn't support him last time and probably won't support him this time. He is not trying to win over people who will find that language alarming. He is trying to excite people who aren't worried about that language at all, who want that, who are here for it, and who are excited about the idea of returning the country to something that it was in a different time. That's why you have him running these ads on repeat with different narrators, even targeted at different demographics, talking about trans athletes and Harris supporting trans people. Saying that she's for they, them, and not us. This is messaging that is directly targeted at, young white male voters and others who are uncomfortable with changes happening in society and who are looking to him to take them back and make America great again, if you will. And so that language, yes, that's going to turn off the people who are already not going to vote for him, but it could excite the people who he needs to get off the couch. In the competition with the couch, he is escalating the rhetoric to try to make the stakes higher for those people.
Right, and we're going to hear from Harris this week as well, who is going to lean into exactly that, which is we can't allow this kind of rhetoric. We can't let this person be back into the White House, sort of ramping up those same distress signals to her voters who might be sitting on the couch. That's where both of them are right now. Their greater fear is not that they're going to lose swing voters to the other side. They're going to lose them to just sitting at home.
Competition with the couch, as
Yes.
Tom said. Yes. Amy Walter, Tamara Keith, always great to see you both. Thank you.
You're welcome.
NASA's Europa Clipper spacecraft will score Jupiter moon for the ingredients for life. A massive NASA spacecraft is ready to set sail for Jupiter and its moon Europa. The craft, named Europa Clipper, will peer beneath the moon's icy crust and determine whether conditions there could support life.
One of the biggest launches for the whole year is coming up soon. The Europa Clipper is actually going to launch from right here at Kennedy Space Center in Florida to Jupiter. And the destination, while it may be Jupiter, it's actually one of the 95 moons of Jupiter, Europa. And scientists have long been intrigued with Europa. Even though it has an icy shell and icy crust, it's believed that there could be a vast global ocean under this ice. And where there's water, NASA says, perhaps there could be life. This is the first mission ever devoted to Europa. There have been spacecraft that have gotten up close and personal with Jupiter before, flybys, if you will, other missions. But really, the emphasis, the focus here is Europa. And in fact, they see Europa as quite possibly the best bet for life outside our planet if it's there. And so that's why they want to go to Europa. Now, the Clipper, which by the way is a huge spacecraft, it needs gigantic solar wings because it's so far from the sun and you need a lot of power. And when the wings are unfurled, it's longer than a basketball court. So this giant spacecraft, one of the biggest ever built for interplanetary studies, is going to be orbiting Jupiter. But every time it orbits Jupiter, it's going to get really close to Europa. And in fact, 49 close flybys are planned of Europa. So it's going to take almost 6 years until 2030 for Europa Clipper to reach Jupiter. And that's going to be almost 2 billion miles of travel by the time it gets there. NASA says every time they're talking to people, this is not a life detection mission. Europa Clipper is not going to go up there and look for life per se. It's going up there to see if the conditions could be right to support life.
U.S. intel officials say Russia is behind attempts to smear Tim Walz. A general view of the Kremlin Towers and Ivan the Great Cathedral in May 2024 U.S. intelligence officials say Russia was behind an attempt to spread baseless claims about Democratic vice presidential candidate Tim Walz. Russia was behind salacious false claims against Democratic vice presidential nominee Tim Walz that circulated widely on social media last week, according to U.S. intelligence officials. The intelligence community assesses that the Russian influence actors created and amplified content alleging inappropriate activity committed by the Democratic vice presidential candidate during his earlier career. An official from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, who spoke on condition of anonymity, told reporters at a briefing on Tuesday. Vladimir Putin wants Donald Trump to win because he knows Trump will roll over and give him anything he wants. We condemn in the strongest terms any effort by foreign actors to interfere with U.S. elections, said Morgan Finkelstein, a spokesperson for the Harris-Walz campaign. Last week, Post on X, formerly known as Twitter, accused Walz of wrongdoing when he was a high school teacher and football coach. That included a video purporting to show a former student making allegations against Walz, which was shared by an X account that has prompted the baseless QAnon conspiracy theory. However, the Washington Post interviewed the actual former student, who is not the man in the video and who said the alleged incident never occurred. Other posts making unverified accusations against Walz were also quickly debunked by users on X and fact-checkers, who noted that screenshots of what was supposed to be an email from an alleged victim contained inconsistencies, including what appeared to be a cursor still visible on the text of one image. The claims were boosted by pro-Trump accounts with large followings. They racked up millions of views on X and other platforms. The post by the QAnon account had more than 4.3 million views before it was deleted, according to Wired. The intelligence official said the video showed several indicators of manipulation, consistent with Russian influence operations. This video is consistent with the pattern of Russian influence actors seeking to undermine the Democratic presidential ticket by fabricating allegations against them, the official said. One of their tactics they use is these staged direct camera videos and try to make them go viral. That includes a video from earlier this year that intelligence officials say Russia staged in, which a woman claimed to be the victim of a hit-and-run accident by Vice President Kamala Harris in 2011. The false claim was spread via a website claiming to be a local San Francisco TV station. There is no evidence any such incident occurred, and the purported TV station does not exist. Researchers say such tactics are hallmarks of a Russian propaganda operation dubbed Storm 1516, uncovered by Clemson University's Media Forensics Hub last fall. The manufacturers purported whistleblower videos and other faked evidence and then tries to make them go viral, according to NBC News. Other Russian influence operations have created websites spoofing real U.S. news outlets to share fake articles generated by artificial intelligence. In September, the Justice Department indicated 2 employees of Russian state broadcaster RT in a scheme to funnel nearly $10 million to right-wing American influencers, who posted the videos opposing aid to Ukraine, praising Trump, and denigrating Democrats. The influencers have said they did not know the company paying them was linked to Russia. At Tuesday's briefings, intelligence officials said efforts by geopolitical adversaries to divide Americans will intensify in the lead-up to Election Day and continue after polls close. Foreign actors, particularly Russia, Iran, and China, remain intent on fanning divisive narratives to divide Americans and undermine Americans' confidence in the U.S. democratic system. These activities are consistent with what these actors perceive to be in their interests, even as their tactics continue to evolve, the ODNI said. The U.S. says Russia would like to see former President Trump win the election, while Iran favors Harris. China does not have a preference in the presidential contest, but is trying to sway down-ballot races, officials have said. Intelligence officials say foreign adversaries are better prepared to exploit the potential uncertainty of the post-election period this year, thanks to what they learned from the 2020 cycle and a better understanding of what happens after the polls close. Both Russia and Iran are probably willing to at least consider inciting violence, including by stoking threats toward election voters and amplifying protests, officials said. Russia, in particular, is expected to boost anything that questions the integrity of the election, no matter who wins, because Russia believes election controversies distract and weaken the United States, the intelligence official said. But if Harris wins, the official said, Russia is expected to become even more aggressive. Deadly E. coli outbreak linked to McDonald's Quarter Pounders sickens 49 people in 10 states. E. coli food poisoning linked to McDonald's Quarter Pounder hamburgers has sickened at least 49 people in 10 states, including one person who died and 10 who were hospitalized, federal health officials said Tuesday. The death was reported in an older person in Colorado, and one child has been hospitalized with severe kidney complications. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention reported. Infections were reported between September 27th and October 11th in Colorado, Iowa, Kansas, Missouri, Montana, Nebraska, Oregon, Utah, Wisconsin, and Wyoming. Colorado has the most cases, 27, followed by Nebraska with 9. Everyone interviewed in connection with the outbreak had reported eating at McDonald's before falling ill, and most mentioned eating Quarter Pounder hamburgers, the CDC said. The U.S. Agriculture Department, the Food and Drug Administration, and state health officials are also investigating. The specific ingredient tied to the outbreak has not been identified, but investigators are focused on onions and beef. McDonald's reported to the CDC that it had removed silver onions and beef patties used for Quarter Pounders from stores in those affected states. The burgers may be temporarily unavailable in those states. Wisconsin health officials recall eggs after a multi-state salmonella outbreak. Wisconsin health officials initiated a recall of eggs following an outbreak of salmonella infections among 65 people in 9 states that originated on a Wisconsin farm. The Wisconsin Department of Health Services said in a statement Friday that among those infected by salmonella are 42 people in Wisconsin where the eggs are believed to have been sold. The eggs were distributed in Wisconsin, Illinois, and Michigan through retail stores and food service distributors. The department said the recall includes all egg types such as conventional, cage-free, organic, and non-GMO. Carton sizes and expiration dates in containers labeled with Milo's Poultry Farms or Tony's Fresh Market. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention confirmed in a statement on its website that 65 people in 9 states were infected by a strain of salmonella with 24 hospitalizations and no deaths as of Friday. The states include Wisconsin, Illinois, Michigan, and Minnesota, Iowa, Virginia, Colorado, Utah, and California, the agency said. The egg recall was undertaken by Milo Poultry Farms, LLC of Bondale, Wisconsin, the CDC said. An organization has a novel way to get members to vote, but is it legal? In America, we encourage voting as a civic duty, but an organization with millions of members is taking that obligation a step further. It's requiring members to vote, or potentially lose their membership and the financial benefits that come with it. The organization of the Neighborhood Assistance Corporation of America, which helps people get low-cost mortgages, NACA, says it has 3.7 million members, including about 870,000 in the 7 key swing states this election year. We're not saying to people vote for a particular candidate, says NACA CEO Bruce Marks. We're saying that there's so much at stake in this election that you have to have your voice heard. Several legal scholars say they've never seen a policy like NACA's before and aren't sure if it violates the law. I think it's troubling, says Professor Rick Hasson, who directs the Safeguarding Democracy Project at UCLA Law. NACA helps members get mortgages on very good terms, no down payment, no closing costs, and below market interest rates. The organization also wants its members, the vast majority of whom are working class and of color, to be engaged in civic life. But Mark says when NACA urges members to vote, not all of them follow through. Mark says there's a big reason NACA is making voting a condition of membership. The organization won't kick out members if they don't cast a ballot in this election, he adds, but it might be in the future federal elections. Obviously, this is a work in progress, Mark says, but we're going to be looking to see whether you voted. NACA can track that because voting participation records are public. The organization is going all out this year. Mark says NACA plans to canvass all 874,000 members in swing states, including more than 400,000 in Georgia. Mark says NACA does not endorse candidates, but that its Economic Justice for All Political Action Committee does back those who support affordable home ownership and economic justice issues. Legal scholars say the organization's new membership policy raises questions. Justin Leavitt, who served in the Biden White House as a senior policy advisor for democracy and voting rights, says a part of the U.S. Criminal Code makes it illegal to spend money to prompt someone to vote or to withhold their vote or to vote for a particular candidate. Leavitt thinks that law, which has been around for nearly a century, could apply to the NACA's new policy. Of course, NACA isn't paying people to vote, but Leavitt notes that removing someone as a member could effectively take away their opportunity for a low-cost mortgage. That's where Hassan of UCLA thinks there could be a problem. He cites an example involving Ben & Jerry's. In 2008, the company planned to give away free ice cream to people who voted. That is, until Hassan pointed out that a voter giveaway could be illegal under federal law. Just because we don't want to induce people to vote for a material gain, he says. Hassan says that because of his intervention, Ben & Jerry's had to offer free ice cream to everyone. I got free ice cream for children, Hassan says. Appraised of Leavitt and Hassan's concerns, Mark defends NACA's new policy. We feel we're absolutely on firm legal grounds, he says. Marx contends that, like any organization, say the Elks, NACA is just setting the requirement for participation and membership. That's all we're doing. Same thing, he says. Of course, membership in the Elks doesn't get you access to a low-cost mortgage. Doug Fireberg, NACA's outside general counsel, says requiring members to vote is a matter of integrity and values. NACA believes that it would be hypocritical for people organizing and talking about economic justice, organizing and talking about things that matter in the American economy, while standing on the sidelines and not voting, Fireberg says. Marx says members' response to the new policy has been overwhelmingly positive. Warren Gamble, who retired from the auto industry, said NACA enabled him to buy a home in Atlanta that he otherwise wouldn't have been able to afford. He says the new policy and believes in NACA's tradition of activism. If you want to be part of NACA, you want to get all the benefits of all the hard work that everybody's doing, you need to come to the table, Gamble says. But fellow NACA member Sylvia White, a financial advisor who lives in Marcopis, Arizona, has doubts. She thinks if the organization enforced its new voting rules, it could alienate some members, especially those who don't like their options at the ballot box. White says they might think, why are you trying to make me vote or do something that I don't want to do? People kind of rebel against that. Mark knows NACA may come in for criticism for requiring its members to vote, but he says that's inevitable. Anytime you have an impact, you're going to get a pushback, Mark says. You wear that as a badge of honor. Taxpayers will get bigger standard deductions in 2025, but with smaller boosts than recent years. U.S. taxpayers will again see higher standard deductions for 2025, allowing them to shield more of their money from taxation on future returns. The Internal Revenue Service detailed the increases in its annual inflation adjustments announced Tuesday. For single taxpayers and married individuals filing separately in tax year 2025, the standard deduction is rising to $15,000, up to $400 from 2024. For couples who file jointly, the standard deduction will be $30,000 for 2025. and an $800 jump from the year prior. And heads of household will get a $22,500 standard deduction, up $600 from 2024. Income thresholds for all 7 federal tax brackets levels were also revised upward. The top tax rate, which remains 37%, will cover incomes greater than $626,350 for single taxpayers in tax year 2025. For example, compared to $609,350 in 2024. The IRS makes such adjustments for each tax year to account for inflation, which has recently been on a downward trend. Last month, inflation in the U.S. dropped to its lowest point in more than 3 years, marking some encouraging economic news. But Americans are still feeling some key price pressures. Core prices, a gauge of underlying inflation, remained elevated in September, driven up by the rising costs for medical care, clothing, auto insurance, and airline fares. While taxpayers will again see higher standard deductions in 2025, the increases announced Tuesday are less than those seen in recent years. In tax adjustments announced last year, for example, the IRS raised single filers' standard deduction by $750 between the 2023 and 2024 tax years, and by $1,500 and $1,100 for married couples and heads of households, respectively. Earlier this month, the Social Security Administration announced a 2.5% cost of living increase for benefits recipients starting in January. That translates to an average jump of more than $50 on monthly checks for millions of people. Similar to the latest tax deduction figures, the coming COLA adjustment is lower than seen in the recent past. Social Security recipients received a 3.2% increase in their benefits in 2024 after a historically large 8.7% benefit increase in 2023, then brought on by record 40-year high inflation. Next year's smaller increase reflects moderating inflation.